Well, we're in the final countdown to finally getting our first look at the new Superman film from DC Studios, and now James Gunn has started to answer some of the really big questions. Things like how much those Justice League members are in the movie, why did they change the title, how much seeding of the future DCU will actually happen, there's a reveal there, and what caused them to go with the Trunks. That's the big question. Well, in case you didn't know, we are just a couple of days away from the first look at Superman from DC Studios. We got a little tease of the very John Williams-inspired theme, and it appears the tagline for the new film will be, "Look Up." Now, with the trailer right around the corner, this movie is going to go into high gear with promotional information, and one of those things is definitely going to be James Gunn talking about the film. Gunn has had a close connection with fans since he took over DC Studios, and now that the big reveal is here, he's not backing down at all. Now, recently, he's been talking quite a bit, and did a pretty big interview with comicbook.com. I gotta figure out how to get this guy. And they dove into some pretty big aspects of the film. We're gonna dive into what he said about the Trunks, of course, but also the title change, the seeding of the future of the DCU. But first, let's talk about this big cast, cameos, and how big of a part some of these other characters will actually have. Now, one thing that's been a big question about this movie is how big the cast is, and all those members of Justice League International. Now, many people were wondering if they were going to be just throwaway cameos or very, very small parts in the film. But based on what Gunn is saying here, well, these guys are not only here to stay, but a big part of this movie. When asked about all these new heroes from comicbook.com, he said, "These characters all get their moment in the sun. They all have their moments. They're not just cameos. These are characters. They're supporting cast. But Mr. Terrific is the main of those characters. He actually has a big part of the plot, and so that was fun." And of course, getting to work with Nathan is always something, and putting him in a stupid look. And then Isabella is great. I've been a fan of hers for a long time, but it was about balance. Now, this is what we want to hear, because fans have grown super weary of throwaway cameos, and quite honestly, they simply don't work anymore. Maybe Marvel used it up. There was definitely a time where a character appearing just generated buzz because they were there, but now they need to be an intricate and purposeful part of a project. Fans have kind of matured in that aspect, and I think Gunn has his finger on the pulse there in a pretty great way. I also love that all three of these characters are going to get some time to shine in the film. It definitely sounds like Mr. Terrific is going to be front and center, and that's pretty suggestive of the new Justice League, since he is quite often the brains of the operation in several iterations. And given all the Maxwell Lord rumors, and of course Sean Gunn playing the character, I think we kind of have an idea of what's going to happen with all these heroes and how they'll eventually unite. Now, one of the more interesting parts of the interview is when Gunn started talking about the legacy name that was attached to Superman early on. If you remember correctly, the film was called Superman Legacy, and then later they changed the title. And the team at Comic Book asked him directly about this, and not only did he answer it, but he pulled the curtain back on a creative process that goes on that I absolutely loved. He said, "I still think it has the aspect of legacy in it. We do this thing called a pre-mortem before we start shooting. We go into a room with me and all the department heads and we say, let's say this movie is a colossal F-up. We find out 2 years from now when the movie comes out, it goes terribly wrong. What are we doing right now that we're not talking about, that we're doing this, making this movie wrong?" It gives a chance for all parties involved to speak their mind, whether it's about the script, whether it's about the casting, whether it's about how departments are communicating with each other. Everybody is allowed, from transportation to whatever. They're all allowed to say what they think. I found it extremely helpful. Now, honestly, this kind of collaborative, team-oriented movie making is exactly what breeds success. And out of all the news I've heard about behind the scenes, this is the best news I've heard. I often have suggested that when you watch the Guardians of the Galaxy behind the scenes footage, everybody working there looks like they're having an absolute ball. People who work on James Gunn movies don't hesitate to return. Gunn doesn't hesitate to rehire them, and there's clearly relationships between these people, suggesting that working on this team is an absolute joy, and this is a prime example of that. Now, Gunn did go on to expand a little bit about legacy, saying when you see the movie, you understand where legacy comes from, because it is, again, it's about Clark and his relationship to the script, and whose legacy is he, really? Making me pretty optimistic about this aspect of the film, because drawing us into Superman's legacy is exactly how fans get connected to the character, because it is really hard to identify with a guy that can fly thousands of miles an hour, is bulletproof, and is basically a living god. Now, the big question Gunn answered though was about the trunks, and many of us have been wondering why they did this. Now, it's very clear that this new Superman movie is not looking to go backwards, but Gunn absolutely is paying homage to the classic Man of Steel look by incorporating the trunks. Now, the red trunks can be a bit divisive, and Gunn in this conversation said he initially chose not to use them, but kept trying to find a way to make them work, and that's when David Cornsweet sold him on it. Now, in an interview at comicbook.com, he said, quote, "We were trying on all these different versions, and we screen tested with trunks and no trunks, and one of the things David said is that Superman wants kids to not be afraid of him. He's an alien. He's got these incredible powers. He shoots beams out of his eyes, can blow the truck over. He's incredibly powerful, could be considered a scary individual, and he wants people to like him. He wants a symbol of hope and positivity. He dresses like a professional wrestler. He dresses in a way that makes people unafraid of him. That shows that. That really clicked with me. And I think they're trying to pretend the Superman costume doesn't have some frivolity to it at its base. Trying to make it look serious is silly because he is a superhero. He's the first one, brightly colored, and that's who he is. So that's where we landed. And eventually we all came to a place where almost all of us agreed on the trunks. Now, I think when this movie comes out, nobody's going to care about the trunks. But leading into it, internet people like to debate, and this has been a point of contention. I'm honestly okay with or without the trunks, but for me, in my lifetime, Superman has traditionally wore the red trunks, and they help palette out some of the other colors like the yellow belt. Now, they're going with a brighter color palette definitely for these new movies, so that alone almost causes you to have the costume broken up. So the red and the yellow in between the two blue parts probably makes it look better on screen, although I will say I like Cornsweet's take on why Superman would wear the trunks, and professional wrestling is big all over the world. So I kind of see what he's saying and love that they kept the old strongman carnival aspect to the costume that's been a tradition from day one. Now, one other thing Gunn did mention though was seeding other projects. He said in the film there are, quote, two moments that tease the future, but then expanded a little bit on how he's doing this and how projects will be connected. He said, if something is there just to set up something else, F it. If Superman sets up stuff in Peacemaker, which it does, then that's great. But that is never, ever, ever with me going to be something that I'm going to sacrifice even a moment or a beat in a story for, especially a movie. With TV, you got a little more leniency to be able to do that. But in a movie, every beat has to be there for the movie itself. Are seeds being planted for lanterns? Yes. There are seeds being planted, but that is never going to be the predominant thing in any scene for me. It's always about getting it closer to the next scene. Now, it seems like Gunn might have practiced for this interview because this is another pretty great answer to the question, and I think what fans want to hear. Early on, Marvel did this very well, adding little tidbits here and there that led to the next film, or it was sort of contained within the post-credit scene. But then, down the road, it started to become apparent that things were being added to make up things for the future, and that always slowed down the current story and took away from that portion of storytelling. Notice when Gunn was doing Guardians of the Galaxy, you really didn't see a lot of that, or really any that I could think of. Every beat carried to the next beat, and that's exactly what he's saying in this quote. This is something that worked when he was making movies over at Marvel Studios, and I'm really glad that he's finding a balance here. Fans want this interconnected world of their DC characters, and I do love that he said Superman sets up stuff for Peacemaker. That'll be a whole nother video, but at this point, it seems like Gunn has found what I think might be the right balance in carrying this forward. Now, keep your eyes peeled because we're just days away from this Superman trailer. I'm hearing awesome things about it, but none of it can be confirmed yet. Apparently, some leaks from the trailer have already found their way out, and we're definitely going to get looks at almost every one of these characters, as well as the Fortress of Solitude and, most importantly, Crypto. So, what do you guys think? How excited are you at this point after listening to all of James Gunn's answers for the upcoming Superman movie? And who's your most anticipated supporting character? I'm definitely going with Mr. Terrific. Now, before you take off, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button, ring that bell for all the updates, and make sure you get every notification because we do daily Marvel and DC content and we don't want you to miss any news.